Moving on with the Benko Gambit, we're about to see a miniature which has been seen many times on the master level. You can find the more detailed info regarding players in the description. We're also going to stress more positional aspects of the opening, especially related with this Fianchetto variation that's going to be seen on the board. Started with d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, b5. After c takes ba6 and b takes a6, we had bishop takes a6. Now, in the past, this has been almost exclusively done by black, because it prevents white from moving the e-pawn, kind of, because in that case, white loses the right to castle. However, today, it doesn't look like the best option for black, and it is widely known that instead of taking the pawn, we're supposed to be going with g6, and only after knight c3, when white is threatening e4, we should take the pawn on a6 with the bishop. Why is that so? Well, let's see. In case of bishop a6, the way to punish black is by playing first g3, and after d6, bishop g2, and after g6, playing b3. This is the key move. The dark square bishop of white is ending up on b2, thus countering the black's monster bishop on g7. So this is what we get, which doesn't make black too happy. This was done for the first time in the famous game between Lajos Portić, the Hungarian legend, and Efim Geller in Biel, Switzerland in 1976. You can check that game if you want, but we are going back to see what happened in this miniature. We had bishop takes a6, and white continued with knight c3 instead of the Lajos Portić continuation g3. We had g6. The dark square bishop of black obviously is going to g7 in this pawn structure, and white chooses this Fianchetto variation. Again, in the past, this has been considered to be the main way of fighting the Benko, and the idea is to make castling available, but the bishop is not going to be too happy on g2, hitting on pawn on d5. On the other side, black is going to be trying to provoke white to push e4 as well, and thus we can further the light squares, since the white's light square bishop is going to be sitting on g2. The other, I'd say, even more popular line for white is e4, after which white indeed loses the right to castle. But after g3 and king g2, they actually can say castle by hand. And then they can continue with their development, while black is going to put their rooks and queen on the open files and fight to weaken further the white's queenside until they win the pawn back and maybe enter better endgame because of better pawn structure. Now we had in the game g3 and then d6, bishop g2, bishop g7, knight f3, and knight bd7. Black hits the most precise move in this position. And at first you may be thinking it is the same whether you develop the knight to d7 first or you castle at this point. But in case of the second, in case of you castle here, white can do the following maneuver with their queen and the f1 rook. Well, the f1 rook after they castle. So now let's say we go knight e7. They play queen c2, so that after knight b6, rook d1, just in time to defend the pawn on d5. White manages to put the rook on d1, freeing up the queen overall to do other things. And one is to protect the c3 knight and prepare b2, b3, or help sometimes rook b1 with the idea of b4. Changing the pawn structure is always good for white in the Benko, because the current one is not making white too happy. Now remember, this queen and rook setup is the best white can get in the Fianchetto variation of the Benko. So as black, we don't want to allow it. We play knight bd7. So that after castling, we play knight b6. This is also one very important moment, because if you don't play this, if you castle, they just play queen c2 and they're going to get what they want. So we must play knight b6, thus kind of preventing white's queen from moving away from the d file. In this case, white queen is going to be stuck defending their d5 pawn for quite some time, and that's going to be one of the main white's problems in the next couple of moves. So knight b6, they play rook e1 in this position. This rook has no good square to go other than d1, I would say, but okay, this is the only remaining one. Now it wants to prepare e4 and then to expand in the center with e5. This is typical idea of white in the Benko Gambit. However, this move e4, this idea is not only good for white, because they're actually abandoning the defense of the d3 square, and that's going to be one of the key interests of black. once that happens. So sometimes even black tries to provoke e4 of white in the Benko. So after rook e1, black just castled, and then e4. Now there is no going back. Either white is going to be pushing e4, e5 at some point soon, or regretting the move because weakening the light squares along the a6, f1 diagonal. Now, what's there to do for black? It may be something about the d3 square, and at the same time to make more difficult the e4, e5 to be accomplished by white. Now, if you want, pause the video and try to find that simple move for black, standing in front of, I would say, a very good idea. Alright, so probably you found it. It's not that difficult. It's knight f to d7, going backwards, but just for a moment. The plan is to get to the e5 square, after which we are coming into the heart of the white's position. Imagine the d3 square being reached by the knight. At the same time, we are opening the g7 bishop to exert pressure on the white's queenside. The f6 knight, as we know from the previous video on Benko, wants to move away from the f6 for various reasons. Moving on, we had queen c2 in the game, and finally, after getting the pawn to e4, you see the queen is free to move. We had knight c4. Black wants to get to e5, but also to survive there with one of the knights. If you go with the one from d7 immediately to e5, white will be happy to trade. We need first knight c4. Also, the knight is exerting pressure on the white's queenside and making difficult their development, of course, attacking b2. And white couldn't really stand that, playing b3 at this point. It's an attempt to get rid of the monster knight on c4. And that's a huge mistake and costs the whole game. Our goal here is not to work on tactics, but nonetheless, feel free to pause and have fun trying to find the right move, which turns the game completely, and black ends up with a material advantage at the end of the line. Now, I'm gonna move on. It's queen a5, the knight on c3 is hanging, and once it is taken, the two white rooks are waiting to be forked by the queen of black or the bishop, and black is already winning. In this game we had knight e1, but in another one, again, I'm saying that there are plenty of games played this way, white decided to just take with the pawn on c4, after which it's very important to be precise, because we can either play queen c3 or bishop takes c3. If we play bishop takes c3, we'll get bishop to d2, after which we cannot really win the exchange because our queen is going to be hanging in case of bishop a1. So what we need to do is queen takes c3, and after queen takes, bishop takes c3, forking two rooks, and one is going to be lost. But in this one that we are following, white went with the knight d1, and then of course we just take the rook, and after b takes c4, the bishop goes back to the safety of its home, and now the rooks are going to say what they have on the two open files on the queen side, leaving white with no counterplay. I'm going to just speed up a little. So bishop d2, queen b6, rook e3, knight e5, rook b3, queen c7, just temporarily going backwards while regrouping in order to make both rooks active on the a and b file. Knight e3, bishop c8, now the bishop is moving away from the a file, you'll see why. Bishop c1, queen a5, just hitting the pawn on a2 to move to a3. Bishop d7, connecting the rooks and also threatening bishop a4, which forced queen b1 at this point, and then just rook fb8. Now, facing the prospect of losing the b file and the black's heavy pieces infiltrating into the white's camp without any counterplay, white simply resigned here. Once again, you could see the simplicity of how black pieces have been moving on the board. One, how important it is to open the g7 bishop and move away the f6 knight. Two, that we want to conquer the light squares once white pushes e4 in the Fianchetto variation when the white's light square bishop goes to g2. Three, is related with the idea of knight e7 to b6. That tells us that we don't just castle in the development phase, but consider what's there important to prevent. This teaches us how not to play automatically. And finally, number 4, that there really is a serious pressure on white's queenside, so that we should be thinking tactically as well, although the opening itself is mainly positional. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed it, please consider clicking on the like button. It's helping the video to reach a wider audience. Feel free also to subscribe, because I'll see you soon in another video on Benko Gambit.